Hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Council chambers. An elite unit of clone troopers have been discreetly transported to the Jedi Temple. In the waning days of the Clone Wars, the Jedi believed it was time to act on the status of the galaxy. However, there was one issue. They needed to deal with the Chancellor of the Republic before actually doing something about the war. Everything went through him, and with him out of the picture, the Jedi might be able to bring peace to the galaxy. The Council discussed the implications of such actions a number of times. It felt like the wrong move, but it needed to be done. The Chancellor had too many emergency powers, so many in fact that if the war ended, he could transform their democracy into a dictatorship. This is what the Jedi feared the most. They knew there were things that he was keeping from them, and his lack of transparency made them fear for the worst. It was bad enough that a couple months before, the Jedi unveiled the truth about the creation of the clone army. The thought had been passed around their chambers more than once. If Dooku created the clone army, who was his master? They both had to have some sort of political sway, and the answer kept leading them back to Palpatine. There also would be no better time to do this. Obi-Wan and Anakin were on the other side of the galaxy fighting a siege. Obi-Wan had been one of the few council members vocal about not betraying Palpatine in that way. He was more so hopeful that the council could task Anakin with a spy mission, believing Anakin would choose the Order over Palpatine. However, that was just wishful thinking and the entire council knew it. So they brought in an elite unit of clone troopers. Mace had seen their work during the siege of Anaxis, and believed they'd make the perfect unit for handling this particular job. If anyone in the Grand Army of the Republic was willing to do unorthodox missions, then it was them. The Bad Batch entered the pristine chambers of the High Council. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before, and it was immediately brought to their attention. They were being ordered to take down the Chancellor. Immediately, this rang of high treason. Hunter was the first one to pipe up, asking why they would target the leader of the Republic. As the Jedi believed, he was behind the Clone Wars. Tech stood silently by Hunter's side, siphoning through information on his tablet. He believed that there was potentially a sensibility to this. However, for them to commit such an act, it would put them at the highest list of hit targets for the Republic. They needed more reasoning than just orders to follow through with it. The Jedi displayed all the information they had, and truthfully, Tech could theoretically back it up. However, due to Echo being in the room, and having learned about his former squad mate's passing, he asked if this related to the death of clone ARC Trooper 5s. The Council had forgotten about that case, but they informed the squad that the Chancellor assured them that the inhibitor chips weren't a problem, and that there was something else. It was an infestation or virus found on Ringo Vinda. The clones were inoculated for it. The Jedi had no reason to believe there was foul play there. Tech denied those statements, suggesting that the Chancellor was wrong. The inhibitor chips were controlling devices. They made the regs more dormant than the Bad Batch. It's why they had such freedoms. Tech also said that the inoculation was a blank, there was nothing in it. He didn't want to assume anything too large here, but he did believe that if someone wanted to control the clones, it wouldn't be out of the question that the inhibitor chips could be used for that. The Council looked around to each other. That was a thought they hadn't even considered. What if the Chancellor was covering up these inhibitor chips so that he could use some sort of executive order on the Jedi? Tech didn't believe that was entirely far-fetched, but the rest of the squad had the thought of treason on their minds. Hunter said that they could monitor the Chancellor's movements, but executing him or assassinating him seemed above their pay grade. They weren't assassins or bounty hunters. The Jedi agreed with that, but they were looking for an efficient team to do something on behalf of the Republic and the galaxy. Hunter turned to his squad before telling the Council that they could make a deal. They would track the Chancellor for half a week. If they found anything suspicious, then they would pull the trigger and deliver all the information to the Council. The members of the Jedi Council turned to each other and agreed to this compromise. The Bad Batch were given their ease of access out of the temple without being seen by anybody else. They were all divided on the issue. Tech and Wrecker were the most willing to do it. Crosshair was very neutral, while Echo and Hunter believed this to be treasonous. Crosshair was split, mostly because he didn't want to disobey orders, but these orders were against the person who technically outranked the Jedi. Tech and Wrecker were okay with taking up the mission because it was just that, a mission. Wrecker did float between being okay with it and not being okay with it, but Hunter believed that Palpatine wasn't a bad person, so he believed that for them, they could use this as a break. They could monitor the Chancellor for a couple of days, report back that nothing had happened, and then return to the battlefront. This did dampen their respect for the Jedi, but it was a time of war. They understood the sacrifices that needed to be made for the betterment of the galaxy. They trailed the Chancellor for the next couple of days, and instead of their recon being simple, the plot thickened immediately. The Chancellor was planning something and they were struggling to understand what it was. There were intercepted communications, and Tech was able to match the voice of that voice to the leader of the Separatist movement. But truthfully, no one believed that Palpatine would be interacting with Dooku. It seemed wrong, so they continued digging. They followed Palpatine to his various locations. They saw that he never slept, not even a single second in a single day. This was literally impossible. There were few species in the galaxy that could avoid sleep for that long, and humans from Naboo were not one of them. Crosshair seemed to be getting a little paranoid at the sense of everything unfolding in front of their eyes. Palpatine wasn't just an ordinary individual. There was something terribly evil about him, and he wanted a chance to kill the Chancellor. Very quickly, the opinion of the Bad Batch shifted into that mindset. It was no longer why the Jedi were suspicious. It was now, what was Palpatine that the Jedi were so afraid of? They couldn't have done this themselves because Sidious would have sensed them. With the clones, it wasn't as apparent through the Force. Not that Palpatine believed the Jedi would do something so ridiculous as it was. The clones continued tracking Palpatine until eventually, they got bold enough to strap a bundle of explosives under his ship. They informed the Jedi that they'd be moving forward with the protocol. To aid them, a bundle of Jedi Masters would be by to pick them up after they assassinated the Chancellor. The Jedi would give the Bad Batch as much protection as need be. They were also warned. Palpatine would be extremely dangerous, but the Bad Batch was quick to act. One night, 3 days before the Battle of Coruscant was set to take place, Clone Force 99 snuck into his residence. They moved around the halls quietly and went to his ship, the same one they'd been tracking. Crosshair figured out that once the ship exploded, he would need to ensure the kill, so he placed a number of deflector panels on the walls so he could make the perfect shot. The clones were quick to get the job done before fleeing to their lookout location once more. Once they were there, a bundle of Jedi gave them their cloaks to hide in and had a getaway ship ready to go. On the edge of the lookout were Wrecker and Crosshair, one to blow the bomb up and the other to confirm the kill. It was very quick sequentially. Palpatine walked into a shuttle, reported by a laser tripwire embedded into the ship's ramp. Once the target was confirmed, the engines heated up and the bomb went off, blowing a hole in the Chancellor's residence, killing royal guards in the process. The bomb that destroyed the Chancellor's vessel also had EMP inside of it, so any and all cameras in the area would be shut down and lose any unsaved data. Thanks to Tech, they knew that no one would be able to trace any potential shots from the lookout. Crosshair kept his eyes pinned, and a lightsaber ignited. Out from the wreckage walked a Sith Lord, one with his face ripped down the middle. The fear that crossed the sharpshooter's body was unreal. He pulled the trigger, and right as he did, he could see Palpatine's gaze look him dead in the eyes, before dropping dead. The information from Tech informed Crosshair that Palpatine's pulse had stopped. He was dead. The clones ran from the lookout and were transported back to the temple for safety. The fallout from this mission would be insanity. No one knew what happened, and Clone Force 99 proved their effectiveness as a military unit. They apologized for their refusal to do the job initially, but no apologies were necessary. They were good troopers. They were right to initially reject the mission. It seemed uncanny without having seen what Palpatine was. Based on Crosshair's report, the Council understood that Palpatine was Sidious, and they had just saved themselves from a near catastrophe. The Senate fell into complete and utter chaos as the Jedi went to lend a hand. Clone Force 99 was pretty much off the records, and they were able to enjoy serenity inside the Jedi Temple for the following days until war struck the heart of the Republic. They'd be on the front lines with the Coruscant Guard in defending the surface of the planet. It had been so short after Palpatine's death that the attack from Dooku and Grievous felt like the entire assassination of the Chancellor led back to him. However, things were different now. Because Sidious was out of the way, Dooku had every intention to win this war. He brought everything he had, but the stakes were even higher for the Republic. Their leader had been killed, and Palpatine was now a martyr to the men who fought for the Grand Army. They returned to Coruscant and fought like it was their last battle. The war for the heart of the galaxy was one that lasted more than one day. It was a siege, because the Separatists brought as many vessels as they could, some of which coming from a reserve that no one knew about. This caused two major lapses in strategy on the galactic battle map. The Separatists risked their forces at Megiddo, Keda, Nemodia, Felucia, Seleucami, and a number of other key worlds so they could win this battle. The Jedi on each of those previous worlds were able to claim victory the moment the siege on Coruscant began. The second major lapse is Dooku hadn't realized that Palpatine didn't tell him everything. Republic shipyards were stocked up with new battle cruisers, as well as the extra amount of fleets that were stationed inside the core in case Dooku tried to overtake Sidious. Palpatine planned for everything, and so he made sure all the statistics for the Republic military presence in the core were skewed. So when Dooku brought even more forces than he was supposed to bring, the Republic was more than ready. With Jedi returning from other parts in the galaxy, the Separatists were in for the fight of their life. Dooku was able to strategically hide inside the invisible hand in the middle of their lines, so it was consistently protected. The Battle of Coruscant would result in the Senate panicking and selecting Bail Organa to lead the peace treaty process, not as a form of surrender, but as a form of end the war so they didn't get uncomfortable. This attack on Coruscant was the closest to home for many of the senators inside the Republic. It made the war real to them, and once politicians become uncomfortable, they bend, because all their manifested power becomes a shell of what it really is. The people on Coruscant were uncomfortable, and they elected to make a decision they wouldn't have made under any other circumstance. They would elect for peace once the battle was won, whereas Mas Amedda would continue the war the same way Palpatine would've. The Senate believed a decisive victory at Coruscant meant a definitive end to the war once they finished off the Separatist forces. Without a target to save on the invisible hand, Republic strategists didn't see the capital ship as a feasible target. It was too well defended. Anakin and Obi-Wan were almost able to convince Republic High Command to let them go in, but it didn't happen. Instead, right before they sanctioned the mission, a Republic Star Destroyer lost control of its shields, and a malfunction inside the engine room caused the vessel to activate half of its hyperdrive engines, while also deactivating its regular engines. What ended up happening was something similar to Anakin's attack over Ryloth, but even more catastrophic for the Separatists. The Star Destroyer got a quarter of the way into hyperspace and it slammed into the Trade Federation cruiser. Once it connected, a burst of energy was sent forward from the Star Destroyer, causing a rip through the Separatist lines. This allowed the Republic to push an aggressive assault. The ground invasion crumbled out from under them, and the clones crushed through the remaining CIS forces as they found victory over Coruscant. The siege lasted for 3 days and cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, but the victory put the Separatists on their back foot. The gamble didn't pay off, and they were now paying the price for it. Key worlds fell out from under them, and to make matters worse, Newt Gunray and the Trade Federation backed out of the Separatist Council. It was a huge gap in their resources, but this only meant that the other council members had a choice: double down or leave like Gunray did. Luckily for the CIS, Dooku was a cunning negotiator, and he was able to swindle more support for his cause. He knew he technically was the last of the Sith, so he would hold that title with some semblance of pride. But there was one thing becoming evident to Dooku. He knew that the longer this war went on, the weaker he would become. The dark side had done a number on him in just 13 years. He didn't believe he could continue this fight for much longer, at least not physically. He could play the political game while Grievous handled the war side of things, which the general was fine with. Grievous would finally have his leash taken off of him. Cities kept Skywalker safe throughout the entire war. Now it was time for him to meet Grievous's blade. It no longer mattered to Dooku. There were no favorites. Obi-Wan had his chance on Geonosis. Every Jedi could die. First thing was first though. Dooku had every intention of screwing up the Jedi. Because it had been less than a week since Palpatine died, and there was only a 3-day battle in between that, the Jedi didn't have time to get rid of the inhibitor chips or launch a formal investigation into Kamino. So now they were getting into that. However, because the inhibitor chips were still present inside the clones' heads, they couldn't do anything if a particular order came through Republic communications. Dooku sent out commando droids to get access to Republic comm chatter and transmit Executive Order 66 into their system. Didn't matter who it hit, as long as it could sow division between the Jedi and their troopers, the CIS could win this war. It took some time for this to get into movement, but the commando droids were able to send the order through right as the Senate was finished drafting up a potential peace treaty. The fallout of Order 66 wasn't terrible. With most Jedi Council members present on Coruscant, they were able to resist the attack of the clones. However, a couple hundred Jedi were killed in the attacks. Order 66 didn't go out to the entire Grand Army, but it did make its way to Coruscant, and it was something that aided everything for the Jedi. Order 66 was a sign that the clones could be controlled, and what could likely link Dooku to the death of Palpatine. The Jedi and Clone Force 99 were in the clear from the assassination, but there was a more pressing issue. The clones could be controlled with singular orders. Luckily, due to working with the Bad Batch, the Jedi suggested removing the inhibitor chips and starting an investigation into the Kaminoans. This was supported on both sides, and as the Jedi began their move into Kamino and the removal process of the inhibitor chips, Bail sent a message to the Separatist government. He informed them that Dooku was behind the creation of the clone army, and he wanted nothing but power for himself. The government realized Bail was right, and they quickly elected to remove Dooku from power, but it wouldn't work in their favor. Grievous would kill every single senator inside the government house on Araxis, and then Dooku would take control over the Separatist movement with little issue. This attack on the Separatist government told the Republic that this war wouldn't end until Dooku died, and without the Kaminoans fully supporting the Republic interest, the Senate made a vote. This decision came from two major factors. The Jedi investigation proved their accusation nearly instantaneously, so it was clear the clones were created by Dooku. While the clones didn't have their inhibitor chips anymore, it was simply clear the Kaminoans could not be trusted. The second reason is because Chancellor Organa found plans in Palpatine's drive for a TK Trooper program. Apparently, all the supplies for this program had been made, and they were still in production, something Palpatine had been doing under the radar. It was meant to replace the clone army, but if it meant the Republic had more troopers to add to their fighting force, then so be it, they can make do with it. Bail and the Senate used the martyrdom of Palpatine to prop up public support for the TK Trooper program, saying that they needed to fight this war. It's what Palpatine would have wanted, so millions of young men and women joined up with the Republic and were quickly prepared for combat. To assist with this, bounty hunters used at the Kaminoan facilities were brought in to assist the rapid training in the Second Republic military. For those elite enough to pass the tests, they'd become TK troopers, whereas everyone else would become regular militia troopers, pretty much the most expendable unit. The Republic had their tier list, sort of like the Separatists did. There was Republic Militia, the TK Trooper, and then the Clone Trooper. The Militia and TK Troopers were basically B1s, just expendable human meat shields to protect the clones, who were the core of the Republic military. Due to his closeness with the Jedi, Bail gave more political leverage to their corner. They were fighting to end the war, and he trusted them. This wasn't favorable in the eyes of the Senate, but the Jedi didn't care about political power. As the war heated up once more, the Jedi continued digging up information on their former Chancellor. At the same time, elite units of clones would be shipped off for recon and sabotage missions. The most integral piece of this was the Bad Batch. Due to their work over in Naxxus, Mace wanted to accompany them on these missions. There was only one reason Mace was accompanying the Bad Batch with them on all these missions. He was there to protect them from General Grievous or Count Dooku. Luckily, as the war picked up, Grievous wasn't anywhere near these foundries. Dooku had actually become rather sick. The cough-up blood type is sick, the type of suffering one must atone to for having committed themselves to the dark side. Due to this, Dooku was bedridden and losing his strength consistently. Grievous was unaware of this, but Dooku was preparing to do something too. He remembered a tale his master told him, and he attempted to do some dark magic, in hopes to prolong his life or at least find a suitable apprentice. Windu and the Bad Batch were saving the Republic war effort single-handedly. They were finding droid research facilities and discovering that the Techno Union had since blindsided the Trade Federation, wiping out its leadership and stealing its droids and supplies. Wat Tambor then took over all their supplies and funneled it into creating new battle droids, ones that'd be able to do more damage than B2s and be mass-produced like B1s. These machines were technological terrors, but with the help of Echo and Tech, they were able to hack into the database and steal the information. Afterwards, they'd destroy the facilities and foundries or wherever else they were. It was just a continuous process, but it didn't mean the war came to an end. Instead, the Clone Wars became a stalemate. This was entirely due to the response from the Separatist military. They had millions of battle droids in reserve, and with General Grievous off his leash, the Republic had to deal with the most vicious leader the droids had. Skywalker and Grievous did engage in a couple battles, but similar to fights between Obi-Wan and the droid general, they never went anywhere. Anakin was also torn. Ahsoka rejoined the Order after delivering Maul to the Temple, where he still was. This technically made Anakin a Jedi Master, but on top of that, Padme had given birth to Luke and Leia, and because the war was being prolonged, he wasn't able to be there for her. He did consider leaving the Jedi Order, but he felt a genuine responsibility to the people of the galaxy. Also, Padme discouraged it. She'd be safe, and the children would be taken care of. No need to worry about that. The perspective of the extending of the war for the clones was much different than it was for the citizens, politicians, Jedi, or civilian troopers of the galaxy. The whole vibe of the war had changed for them. Initially, they were bred to be soldiers, to fight and die for a republic they never met. Now they learned they were bred for a proxy war, and that ruined everything for a lot of them. Their brothers spent 3 years dying for nothing, and now they were forced to fight for the republic for real. Their energy was gone. What made matters worse for them is that this new war had no end in sight. They are now bunking with civilians, where their brothers once lay. It was horrendous for them. At least the TK troopers didn't have an ego. Most of them were good to the clones, but it didn't change the demeanor from them. They felt like they were being replaced because they couldn't replace themselves soon enough because of the Kaminoans. For lack of a better word or even explanation, they felt more expendable than ever before. They were simply drones, being thrown into the battlefield. Some of the clones wished they hadn't adopted emotions and attachments. It would have made things easier. Some of them wished they died at Geonosis or other battles during the war. All of them wished that the war ended at Coruscant. but the Jedi were mobilizing harder than ever before. So at the time many of the men of the clone army felt most desperate, they had more support than ever before. The Jedi were always with them, but now there were citizens laying down their lives for clones on the front lines. TK and militia troopers didn't compare to clones in the slightest, but they took the brunt of casualties. The clones were very appreciative for them at the very least, but there was a dissonant feeling for many of them. The Jedi leaders tried to keep the morale up, and it was because of the Jedi that the clones were able to find value in their lives once again. As the Clone Wars made its way into its 6th year, Mace Windu and the Bad Batch were able to finally locate Count Dooku. Commando Squad's been trying to find him for years. He was constantly on the move, and it was mostly because he no longer stayed in his castle in Sereno. Dooku purchased a super yacht so he could keep his luxury but also avoid the war. Grievous by this point was holding all the military power, and he did see Dooku as useless, but it didn't matter to him. Grievous could deal with him once the war was over and won by him. Despite Grievous's cocky attitude, the war wouldn't be ending in his favor. The CIS were on their last legs, and this was due to the collective push made by the Republic, but the Bad Batch and Windu were perhaps the architects of the Separatist collapse. Without high-quality foundries or research facilities creating new and better weapons, droids, and ships, the Separatist war machine crumbled. It wasn't like they didn't try and stop them either, but Clone Force 99 was simply too elite, especially with the likes of Mace Windu accompanying them. The Marauder wouldn't even land on Dooku's yacht when they found it. They'd simply bomb the ship from a distance and confirm the kill once they saw Dooku floating through space. Because Clone Force 99 wanted to make sure they didn't leave any stone unturned, they let Tech and Crosser search the wreckage to see if they could find any information on what Dooku may have been planning. As this was happening, across the Outer Rim, a battle was commencing on the ground at Utapau. Masters Kenobi and Skywalker were able to intercept General Grievous. He was planet hopping at the moment, which for him was pillaging supplies, destroying civilization, and then moving to another system. He was simply trying to jump ahead of the Republic and avoid them. But thanks to Republic scouts, the two Jedi were able to cut him off. They would engage with the droid general in a massive duel. This fight would span the entire staging ground for the Separatists. Their lightsabers would speed against each other, and it would result in Anakin taking a critical blow from Grievous, before the droid general ferociously fought against Kenobi. The two longtime rivals could finally end it here. 6 years of combat. As Obi-Wan seized the upper hand, Skywalker came in with a perfect strike to help Obi-Wan defeat Grievous once and for all. As the Republic led by Skywalker and Kenobi fought against the Separatists on Utapau, Clone Force 99 was able to uncover something for Windu. They learned that Dooku planned on using an old Sith from Morabon to essence transfer into. The only thing Dooku didn't understand is that the very process of doing this would be his undoing. He knew he was sick, but there was a reason Palpatine never intended on using the ancient Sith for essence transfers. The Sith individual would steal his power and strength and then use it for his or her own gain. Sidious preferred cloning because it was a much more logistical means to achieving his end goal of immortality. Dooku was always a step or two behind Sidious, and this was yet another example of it, because Sidious never wanted Dooku to catch up. The Count spent 3 whole years believing he was taking Sidious's master plan and using it for himself, when it was simply something Palpatine constructed to lead Dooku away from the entire cloning idea. It worked, but it meant that as the Republic claimed its final victory over the Separatist movement, Windu would have to face down an ancient Sith. On the Sith homeworld, Mace would be ambushed by a Sith Lord from the past, one resurrected by Dooku, and he engaged. Their blades sped together against each other, each of them looking for their chance at victory. The Sith had returned from eons of rest, resurrected by an incorrect Sith spell. They fought across the landscape of the Sith homeworld. The Jedi Master launched himself at the Sith, throwing into a wall before he retaliated, and then levied an offensive attack against the Sith Lord. Mace was able to leap over the Sith and strike them down in one swift and decisive motion. Windu looked up and held his deignited lightsaber and turned to see the limp body of the Sith Lord. The clones called out to him and told him to get to their location. The Sith temple was crumbling. The Sith were destroyed and it was time for them to go. Mace ran up as the temple fell into pieces behind him, and he leapt up, grabbing Wrecker's hand as he pulled him into the Marauder and they pulled away from the Sith homeworld. The destruction of the Sith would accompany the failure of the Separatist movement. Grievous wasn't the last defeat, but his death, along with that of Dooku's, would lead directly to the crumbling of their movement, run by droids. Clone Force 99 would be recognized for their heroism throughout the extended period of the Clone Wars. The Senate itself was able to piece together a semi-functional government in the rebuilding period of the war. The worst part of the 6-year-long Clone War is that in the previous 3 years, the entire Outer Rim was torn to shreds. So not only was the remainder of the Separatist territory before the Battle of Coruscant in ruins, but everything else from the last 3 years of combat was too. The criminal empires that were united under Maul were torn down by Grievous, similar to how he did with the Dathomirian witches. The Outer Rim was worse than ever before because of this, but the Republic was able to work its way into helping out. Positive growth for the Outer Rim meant positive growth for the Greater Republic. This was entirely due to the fact that the Outer Rim was under Republic jurisdiction, with battles taking place on those key worlds, so the expansion was kind of forced into their hands. But Bail Organa was built for the role of Chancellor in a time like this. He used the volunteers from the war to protect the Outer Rim interests, and he had droids from the war reprogrammed so they could be used in the rebuilding process. It was very difficult, but it would pay off in years to come, probably after Bail and this entire Senate committee passed away. The Bad Batch were heralded in as heroes, but as their time in the spotlight continued, they'd be assigned their little sister. There was a girl that had been worrying about them for the past 3 years. Omega would finally be able to be freed from Tipoca City, and the Bad Batch would have their new challenge of taking care of their little sister, an undertaking they would take on with great joy. The Jedi were able to see their own failures, and despite them doing right by the galaxy by killing Palpatine, it felt like they were in the wrong for having aided to the prolonging of the Clone Wars. As a result, they decided that Coruscant should no longer be their home, and they jumped to another core world to continue growing their order on Tython. Anakin didn't stay in the order, after missing out on most of the first 3 years of Luke and Leia's lives. It was a hard transition because he didn't want to leave the order, but it is what was best for him and his family. The Jedi would also be a huge help in the aid the clone army received in the post-war era. They headlined bills to help the clones get protection and credits, allowing them to retire from the active duty and become free people. It was the greatest reward, especially for Generation 1 clones who spent 6 years fighting a grueling war. Despite the terrible casualties that came from the war, the galaxy was without the Sith and Palpatine. There was no Empire, and the Separatist movement faded into history books. The Republic would rally behind Organa as they transitioned into this new era of peace. And that, my friends, is our grand tier request. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Dark Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Sharkman Dory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Like Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Luke Denwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. If you want to support me otherwise, go check out the Patreon. Super cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So for the assassination on Palpatine, I wanted the Jedi to have the most influence on the attack. I don't think the Bad Batch would just do it without reason, and that's why there was a brief period before they actually did the job. I don't think they could genuinely take on Palpatine in a straight fight, but if he wasn't expecting it, like if he literally did not expect it, I don't think he would see it coming. I think he'd be strong enough to survive, but the shock of the explosion would allow Crosshair to definitely make the kill. The added time of the war felt like something that needed to happen. Dooku would probably become much more invested in prolonging the war, but I felt like he'd have a difficult time doing it because of his physical illness, and the inspiration for that was President Snow from the Hunger Games series. Dooku's an older individual that's trying to maintain this regime as he's progressively getting sicker and he's seeing it all crumble out from under him. And he's kind of left helpless to it because he's getting sick and he can't lead the way he would have if he was younger. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you liked the new animation. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.